They had been saying it for years, long before he ever spoke her name out loud. "She's too wild," the town murmured whenever her shadow crossed the dusty main road, whenever the wind tangled her hair like it had a personal grudge, whenever her laughter cut through silence like a blade. Too wild to be trusted. Too wild to be tamed. Too wild for any man who valued peace over fire. The cowboy heard every word. Not because he listened for them, but because small towns have a way of making whispers echo. He first saw her at the edge of the prairie just before dusk, standing barefoot on a fence rail as if balance were an instinct rather than a skill. The sky behind her burned orange and bruised purple, and she looked like she belonged to it more than the land beneath her feet. He should have looked away. Men like him survived by knowing when not to stare at trouble. But he didn't. He watched the way she faced the horizon as if daring it to move first, the way her eyes carried storms that never apologized for the rain they brought. She wasn't beautiful in the soft, careful way men like to claim. She was beautiful the way lightning is, dangerous and impossible to ignore. The first thing he noticed wasn't her face, but the stillness around her, as if the world itself paused to see what she might do next. Horses in the nearby corral snorted and shifted uneasy, sensing something untamed that didn't wear a saddle. He felt it too, a pull he couldn't name, sharp and unsettling. When she finally looked at him, it wasn't curiosity in her eyes, but recognition, as though she'd known he'd be there all along. People said she didn't belong anywhere, that she'd burned bridges before they were even finished being built. They said she laughed too loud, spoke too honestly, loved too fiercely, and walked away without looking back. They said she was trouble wrapped in skin and bone. What they didn't say, but believed just as strongly, was that she scared them. Women like her reminded them of everything they'd given, up to fit neatly into expectations. The cowboy had heard those stories too. He'd seen the way shopkeepers stiffened when she entered, how conversations died mid-sentence, how judgment followed her like dust behind a galloping horse. He'd also seen how she never slowed for it, never bowed her head or softened her edges to make others comfortable. That alone made something in him respect her. He knew what it cost to stand alone in a world that preferred obedience. His life had taught him that survival didn't come from being liked, but from being true enough to endure the consequences. He was a man shaped by open land and long silences, by nights where the stars felt close enough to touch and mornings where the sun rose without asking permission. He'd learned early that control was an illusion and that the best partnerships were built on trust, not force. That's why, when someone at the saloon laughed and said, "No man will ever keep her," he didn't laugh with them. He said nothing, only took a slow drink and felt the corner of his mouth lift. Keeping was never the point. The next time he saw her, she was riding hard across the plains, hair flying loose, no saddle, no reins, just her hands and her instincts guiding a powerful, half-wild mare that others had failed to break. Men had tried to dominate that horse with ropes and pain. All they'd earned were scars and resentment. She, on the other hand, leaned low and spoke softly, and the mare responded like they shared a private language. The cowboy watched from a distance, heart pounding, not with fear but admiration. That was when he understood something essential. Wild doesn't mean reckless, and untamed doesn't mean unlovable. It means unwilling to surrender what makes you alive. When she noticed him again, she slowed, the mare tossing her head but obeying. Dust settled between them. For a moment, neither spoke. Silence stretched, heavy but not uncomfortable. Then she smiled, a quick, knowing curve of her lips, as if she could see the thoughts he hadn't dared to voice. "You staring or thinking?" she asked, voice low, amused. He tipped his hat, unashamed. "Trying to figure out if the stories got it wrong," he replied. Her laugh rang out, sharp and free. They always do. He liked that answer. Over the following days, their paths crossed more often than coincidence could explain. Sometimes it was at dawn near the river, sometimes under the brutal noon sun, sometimes in the quiet hour before night claimed the land. They spoke of small things at first, weather, horses, the stubbornness of fences. But beneath every word was an undercurrent, an awareness that neither of them was ordinary, that both carried histories written in scars rather than ink. He never asked her to be less. He never hinted that she should slow down, soften up, or settle into something smaller. Instead, he listened, and she noticed. One evening, as the wind picked up and the prairie grass whispered secrets, she told him why people called her wild. She spoke of leaving a home that tried to cage her, of loving fiercely and losing painfully, of choosing freedom even when it meant loneliness. She didn't ask for sympathy, only understanding. He gave her neither pity nor promises. He simply said, "Sounds like you survived." That was the moment her eyes changed, when the guarded distance gave way to something warmer, something dangerously close to trust. Still the town watched. They waited for the inevitable fall, the explosion, the heartbreak that would prove them right. Men shook their heads and said he'd regret it, that no cowboy could outride a storm like her. Women whispered that she'd ruin him or leave him broken. The cowboy heard it all and felt none of the doubt they expected. He didn't see her as a storm to outrun or a fire to contain. He saw her as the land itself, fierce and honest, capable of destruction and creation in equal measure. And deep down he knew one truth that made him smile when others warned him away. If loving her meant standing in the path of the wind and refusing to step aside, then so be it. Some things were worth being unsteady for. Some things were worth choosing, even when the world insisted you were wrong. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the prairie swallowed the light, he made a quiet decision that would change both their lives. He wouldn't try to tame her. He wouldn't ask her to be anything but exactly what she was. And whether she stayed or rode on when the call of the wild grew too loud, he would meet her as an equal, not a master. Somewhere in the distance a coyote howled, and she smiled like she understood its song. The town still said she was too wild. The cowboy, watching her stand fearless against the dark, thought only one thing. Good. By the time the town realized the cowboy hadn't backed away, the story had already changed shape. It no longer sounded like a warning whispered over coffee or a joke tossed across a saloon table. Now it sounded like disbelief. People watched the two of them together, as if waiting for a spark to turn into a wildfire, convinced it was only a matter of time before everything burned. She remained exactly as she had always been, unapologetic, sharp-edged, free in a way that made rules feel optional. She still rode before sunrise and returned after dark, still spoke her mind even when silence would have been safer, still laughed at danger instead of stepping aside. The difference was him. He didn't flinch. Where others tried to brace for impact, he leaned in, steady as an old oak against relentless wind. He never chased her when she needed space, never questioned her when she chose to disappear into the open land for hours or days. When she came back, dust-covered and alive with stories she didn't always share, he was there, the same calm presence, offering water, warmth, and a look that said she was welcome without conditions. That unsettled her more than anger ever could have. She had learned how to survive men who tried to control her, how to leave before their expectations turned into chains. She had never learned how to deal with a man who let her be. The town waited for the breaking point. They assumed it would come when she refused to settle, or when his patience finally wore thin. But patience wasn't what he practiced. It was acceptance. And acceptance, she discovered, was far more dangerous to her guarded heart. One night, under a sky torn open with stars, she finally asked him the question that had been circling between them like an unspoken dare. "Why don't you try to change me?" Her voice wasn't defensive, just curious, almost wary. He took a long moment before answering, eyes on the fire instead of her face. "Because anything worth riding alongside doesn't need a tighter rein," he said simply. The words landed heavy. She looked away, jaw tight, fighting something inside her that wanted to bolt. Freedom had always meant leaving first. Now freedom looked like staying without losing herself. And that scared her more than solitude ever had. The town saw flashes of tension and mistook them for cracks. They didn't see the quiet battles fought in the dark, the way she paced like a caged animal when feelings grew too close, or the way he stood firm without cornering her. When she pushed, he didn't push back harder.
He held his ground.
When she pulled away, he didn't chase. He waited. Slowly, something shifted. Trust crept in like dawn, subtle but unstoppable. She began to let him see pieces of her past. She'd buried deep, the nights she'd slept under open skies because closed walls felt like traps, the love she'd once given to someone who tried to own it, the fear that one day even her own wildness might abandon her. He listened without interruption, without judgment, without trying to fix what didn't need fixing. In return, he shared his own truths, the loneliness of endless roads, the weight of always being the steady one, the quiet hope that somewhere out there was a person who wouldn't ask him to be less grounded or more reckless than he was. They weren't opposites trying to cancel each other out. They were two forces learning how to move together without losing momentum. The breaking point everyone expected finally came, but not the way they imagined. It happened the day she announced she was leaving town for a while. chasing a pull she couldn't explain, a restlessness that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with who she was. The town buzzed, certain this was the end, proof that wild things couldn't stay. They watched him closely, waiting for anger, desperation, or heartbreak. He felt all of it, but he didn't let it rule him. When she told him, braced for an argument, he nodded. "Go," he said. "Just don't disappear on yourself." Her eyes searched his face, looking for the trap, the unspoken demand. There was none. That night she left without promises, without timelines. Days turned into weeks. The town smirked, satisfied. They said they'd been right all along. But then one evening she came back, not because she was chased by regret or fear, but because she wanted to return. She rode in at sunset, the same wild spark in her eyes. But now there was something else too, a sense of choice. She found him where she'd left him, working quietly, as if the world hadn't been holding its breath. When he looked up and saw her, his smile was slow and real. No accusations. No triumph. Just recognition. That was the moment the story sealed itself. People could no longer pretend this was about taming or surrender. It was about two people strong enough to let each other remain whole. The town still talked, because towns always do. But their words had lost their power. She stood taller now, not because she'd been softened, but because she'd been seen. He stood beside her, not overshadowed, not diminished, but steady and sure. When someone finally said it to his face, "She's still too wild." You know, he didn't bristle or defend. He smiled, that same knowing smile he'd worn from the beginning, and answered, "Good, she's mine. Not mine as in owned, but mine as in chosen. Mine as in matched. Mine as in standing beside me because she wants to, not because she's been cornered into staying." And she, hearing it, didn't flinch. She reached for his hand, fingers lacing with his, grounding without restraining. The land stretched out before them, wide and unforgiving and beautiful, much like her. Their story didn't end with certainty or perfect peace. It ended with movement, with open roads and open skies, with two people walking forward, knowing there would be storms and still choosing each other, and that is why this story matters. Because it isn't about taming the wild or romanticizing chaos. It's about understanding that the fiercest hearts don't need cages, they need companions brave enough to stand with them. If this story stirred something in you, if you felt the pull of open land and unbroken spirit, then you already understand why stories like this deserve to be told. Stay connected, be part of this journey, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories where strength, freedom, and love collide. The next story might not be about cowboys and wild hearts, but it might just remind you of your own.